In this slideshow, we're going to cover the presidency. We will cover the presidency in two sections. The first section is the historical presidency. The second is the modern presidency. First, let's cover some modern-day examples of presidential power. Over the years, the role of the presidency has expanded. Modern presidents sometimes take actions on their own, without the guidance from Congress, through executive orders and presidential memorandums. Executive orders are signed by the president to make administrative changes. They make significant changes in public policy, but are limited in scope. For example, President Obama signed an executive order raising the minimum wage for federal workers to $10.10 per hour. This is a significant change in that it raises the wages of many federal workers, but it is limited in that the president can only make this change for federal workers, those workers who are currently employed by the federal government. The president cannot sign an executive order raising the minimum wage for all workers. That action would require legislation passed through Congress. The presidential memorandum is an action taken by the president that directs agencies to take specific actions as if the president is acting as a supervisor. An example would be the president issuing a memorandum directing federal authorities to not enforce federal bans on marijuana use in states that have already decided to legalize the substance. Originally, presidents played a very small role as a government actor. They spent much of their time filling vacancies in the federal bureaucracy. This included interviewing people to fill postmaster positions in small towns. The president played a very limited role in forming national policy. In the 19th century, presidents relied on cabinet members for questions about policy, clarifications and complaints about agencies, and advice on whether to veto a bill or sign it. Cabinet positions came with more power and were more important than they are today. Members of the cabinet often used their positions as stepping stones into other positions in government. Very few politicians use cabinet positions as stepping stones today. For much of American history, party control was unified across the legislative and executive branches. The winning presidential candidate often pulled his party's congressional candidates into office on his coattails. After World War I, divided government became the norm. The president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Only Congress can declare war, but recently we see presidents take military action and then get approval from Congress to continue action. Attempts to stop action include cutting off funds from troops, which is a dangerous and politically risky move. For example, in 2007, Democrats attached a requirement for a timetable for leaving Iraq, and President Bush vetoed it. Knowing that withholding funding from the military is a dangerous and unpopular move, Congress eventually passed funding for the troops without the timetable for removal that Democrats wanted. The president is the head of government and also the head of state. The president and his Secretary of State negotiate treaties with other countries. Any treaty they negotiate has to be ratified by a 2/3 majority in the Senate. This is not always a given. For example, the Senate rejected a peace treaty at the end of World War I, which contained provisions for the League of Nations, which was the predecessor to the United Nations. President Wilson strongly supported U.S. involvement in the League of Nations, but could not get Congress to agree. Now, Congress can choose to write legislation that gives the president more or less discretion in carrying out laws. They can write legislation to be very specific so as to not leave anything up for interpretation, or they can use vague language that allows the president to implement a policy as he deems appropriate. In 1921, Congress passed the Budget and Accounting Act, which gave the president the responsibility of compiling budgets from the executive departments and submitting them to lawmakers as a single package. Sometimes the budget sails through Congress, but oftentimes Congress completely ignores the executive's budget. It is often used as a political tool on the campaign trail to demonstrate to voters what the priorities of the president are. Though the role of the president is to carry out the laws, not write them, modern presidents have taken a larger role in policymaking. President Franklin Roosevelt famously said, "The president proposes, Congress disposes." He was referring to the role of the president as someone who puts forth policy ideas for Congress to consider. Modern presidents put forward their policy ideas to the public during campaigns and bring them to Congress to consider. Sometimes they have the power to get their ideas passed, and sometimes they do not. One way the president can push his or her policy agenda is by going public. Going public is when the president, or any advocate of a policy really, makes public appeals to promote their policy agenda. As you can see from the graph, since 1980, the president has made far more minor addresses to the American public regarding his policy agenda. You can probably think of a few examples of President Obama appealing to the public. An example would be when he went on the popular web series Between Two Ferns to promote his healthcare policy. While the president has used minor addresses more often in recent years, fewer households are watching the president's major address to the public, the State of the Union. The decline in viewership for the State of the Union may be due to an increase in the number of television options for consumers. Appealing to the public has also led presidents to do more domestic travel. As you can see in the graph, there has been a steady increase in presidential domestic travel since the Carter administration. To a lesser extent, there has also been an increase in foreign travel. Next time, we will cover the federal judiciary.